So today, part two.
Yeah, so for those of you who are just the truckers and who are staying on for every session, go take another break if you want. But for those of us who are joining anew, we're gonna go into, what this is, who we are, what we're doing. So, Polly, thank you for that amazing introduction. I'm just gonna jump right in. I'm one of the co-hosts, Danielle Viasana. I'm an independent photojournalist and also a community team member of the Everyday Projects, which is a global community of visual storytellers, all committed to using imagery to combating harmful misperceptions and to rise above persistent inequality. And I have the amazing, amazing Polly Arungu, founder of Black Women Photographers, who I enjoy so much co-hosting with. And it's just such a joy to be here with you for the essentials. We need to
Truly,
figure out
truly
how to
my
hang
favorite part.
out like outside of the essentials.
I know, y'all. I mean, listen, I'm gonna keep saying this. We're gonna maybe not next year because it'll take some heavy planning,
Yeah.
but maybe season 10, we gotta go on the road. I mean, the Caribbean, India, I saw so many beautiful countries in the chat that I would love for us to visit and do this live somewhere. But yeah, this is one of my favorite projects that we do each year with you all. And I'm very excited about this next class as well because this is something that just like, oh, it's like mind grabbing. Like I haven't even dived into this next class because I just find it to be such an overwhelming topic. But before I even say that, why we are having this weekend and why it's free and has been free is because of our incredible partner, Photo Wings. It is a nonprofit organization dedicated to utilizing the power of photography to further deep thinking, communication, and action. Their extensive online content and Photo Wings outreach programs have myriad educational applications and possibilities.
Yes. So here we are. Polly has already given us a good
I know I always keep getting ahead of myself because I'm always so excited. Like,
oh no, it's great. No, it's great. I just thought you said it perfectly, kind of giving us a recap of the teachers from yesterday and what to expect today. So with that, let's just jump right in. If you haven't marked them yet, these are all of the socials to follow us, and also stay tuned for when those videos go online. They will be available forever and ever and ever as long as the internet exists. So make sure you bookmark those. And yes, with that, we have our next incredible guest. Dun 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 dun. Tara Pixley. Oh, that was like perfect timing. um, oh, that's my aunt's phone, but it'll go off in a sec. So Tara Pixley, is the baddest bee in the industry. Yes, you cannot say no. It is true. And I am convinced that she has at least a few clones, not AI
not
generated.
a few, like
Yeah,
dozens.
like dozens. Yes. There is nothing that Tara Pixley has not done. And on top of that, she's an incredible person with an incredible heart. And it is no surprise that Tara is like, oh my gosh, AI, what do we do? The visual media industry is freaking out. And Tara's like, I got this. I got this. I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna research it. I'm gonna share it with everyone. Just calm down, okay? So yeah, but let me go into my actual bio of Tara. She is a freelance photojournalist. She's a professor. She's a textbook author. She's a researcher. She's a PhD holder. She probably has like 10. I am just like, Tara, can you please lower the bar for all of us? Like, you're making it really hard for the rest of us. But yes, Tara Pixley is a queer Jamaican American photojournalist whose work frames race, gender, climate futures, LGBTQ plus, and immigrant communities through a solution lens. Her clients include Apple, the North Face, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, NPR Newsweek, the Atlantic, Huffington Post, ProPublica, ESPN, like all of them. She is currently a Fulbright specialist in visual media, Fulbright, and previously a Reynolds Journalism Fellow, Pulitzer Center grantee, IWMX Next Gen Fellow, World Press Photo Solutions Visual Journalism Initiative grantee, a Knight Visiting Nieman Fellow at Harvard, And she is currently the vice president of the MPPA board, a board member of Stock Photo Co-op Stocks United, and executive director of the Authority Collective. I mean, for real, like, there is nothing that Tara Pixley cannot do. So, Tara, tell us how we are not all doomed by AI and how you're going to save us all.
Oh my gosh,
Welcome,
Danielle.
welcome, no pressure.
What an intro. Hello, Danielle. Hello, Polly. Thank you so much to Black women photographers and the Everyday Projects and Photo Wings for having me. Thank you for that stellar intro. I can't live up to all of that, so but we'll see. We'll see what happens. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I know folks are all over the world and different time zones, so we really appreciate you tuning in to listen to us. Um, First, I want to say that really importantly, this is a kind of primer and a briefing on AI. I am not claiming to be an expert. I work with my colleague, Javel Tamayo. We've actually put this presentation together. We've given it this talk in a few different places. She actually would have been with me today, but she's giving a talk about AI elsewhere. So we like to call ourselves AI doulas. We're kind of not experts, but trying to help people navigate this space, trying to help you understand it and feel more comfortable with it. And I think it's really important to know that the speed and breadth with which this technology is developing, makes it pretty unlikely for any one person to be an expert in all of it, but we can learn about how particular aspects of AI function. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Generative AI visuals. We've got about 20 minutes for me to give an overview of how Gen AI imagery works, various tools for verification, which I think is really important. And that part is what is giving me a lot of hope. So I'll spend a lot of time on that. And then some key issues that we need to keep an eye on and think about. I know that AI can feel really scary. It's a new technology. And I just want to remind everyone, I know some of you might be a little younger perhaps and don't remember the switch to digital. But when photography changed from film to digital photography, there was a similar kind of terror, right? Of what is this? Why is this happening to us? This technology is wild. And even further back when photography first entered the world in the mid 1800s, painters, sculptors, they were all like, what is photography? This is wild. So the thing about our industry and the work that we do as photographers, visual storytellers, is as the technology changes, our relationship to it changes. And that has been happening for a really long time. So it's not as scary as it seems. And I hope that I'll be able to share that with you all today. I'm going to start sharing the screen. Can you see that? Okay.
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, amazing. So, um, this image here that you see is a visual that I created with DALL-E. I'll talk more about it and what it tells us about AI at the end, but just wanted to start there with this little quirky little, this is what the Gen AI model I was working with DALL-E spit out when I asked it to give me an image of the future of journalism. So we'll come back to that at the end. I have a few more things to say about that, but wanted to start there. Now, what are or what are AI generated visuals? And you'll hear me say Gen AI from now on or just AI, but I'm talking specifically about AI generated visuals. Basically, Gen AI is images or AI generated visuals are images that are created through text and or image prompts by artificial intelligence programs. And there are many, like Midjourney, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, Adobe has its own model, Firefly, Google has its own model, Gemini. We'll talk more about Gemini and some things that happen with it later. There's also a lot of video generative visuals generating models, Hyper, Runway ML, and Sora AI, which I just shared a demo of it here. That's upcoming. It hasn't kind of hit the market yet. Only a few people have access to it, but this is an example you can see. Let me see if I can play it again. So this is the reimagining of historical footage of California during the gold rush, which of course we don't have actual video footage of that time period. So it's kind of doing this interesting thing to show you how photorealistic, how documentary style and aesthetic images can look that are coming from this video generator that, again, Sora AI is not out yet. So I think a few of the things that are really important to know about Gen AI is that these different models produce different kinds of qualities or looks of images. Some of them are a little more illustrative, a little more cartoony. Some of them are much better at photorealistic imagery. And when you play around with them, you start to see the difference. But all of these models work off of this idea of a text to image prompt. So you put in a text prompt like this: show an American man with a red hat voting in an election booth in a gym in the style of a news photograph made by a Canon 5D in natural light. Now that's really specific, right? This is a great prompt that my colleague Javel Tamayo came up with, trying to include all of these things: adjective, noun, verb, the context, the style that you want, details. So saying a news photograph made by a Canon 5D in natural light gives the AI model something to really hold on to in terms of, oh, this should be photorealistic, documentary style. And this is what the Gen AI model spat out. So this one was made with ChatGPT. And you can see the prompt up here, the same thing I just read. And then the AI model is very, here you go. Here is the new style photograph you requested. And it repeats back what you asked for. Now, something I think that's really interesting, as we can see this image here, it's pretty photorealistic, but it doesn't quite have that real sense of a documentary image that we would like to see. You can tell it's a little more illustrative, looks a little more cartoony, right? But if we do a Google search for the exact same language that we used in that Gen AI prompt, you can see the images that come up from that Google search. So it gives us a little bit of a sense of where are these Gen AI models actually pulling their images from? Where are they getting these ideas of how to build a visual from what we've prompted? But along with that, I think it's important to know that we're not actually that clear about where Gen AI models typically pull their knowledge from. They are being trained on a lot of different data sets. And some of them, we know Midjourney and Stable Diffusion were trained on a data set called Lion 5B. I'm actually not sure how to pronounce that, but I like to say it Lion. Uh, and and that particular data set had over 2.5 billion images, excuse me, billion images and captions that those two models were being trained on. And so they're pulling their ideas about how to make images from that data set. But there are a lot of problems even with that data set. Researchers later found that at least 1,000 URLs that are contained within that data set had verified child sex abuse materials. So the models were being trained on really concerning imagery. And other data sets, including that one, it turned out that they'll have these kind of categories for images to help the AI model understand what they're looking at. And so in some of those data sets, researchers found that there were images and categories that had things like Nazi soldiers that were categorized as hero, right? So when we have those kinds of images being fed into our Gen AI models, it's a little concerning. How are they actually understanding these things? They don't have the knowledge, right? They're not human. They're not necessarily being trained to recognize the difference between Nazi soldiers and other things. And so having that kind of categorization for an AI model is a little concerning. So there's things like that that are happening that I think we do really need to pay attention to and that we can think critically about, is where are these images coming from? What kind of ideas are being produced out of the data sets that AI models are being trained on, and how do we improve that process? So the more that we know about that, the more that we invest as, visual storytellers and people of color, people from around the world, women and non-binary folks who are really thinking about equity and ethics, which is what I care the most about, and that's why I turn toward AI. We need to have a better understanding of these things and the technical components behind it so that we can really address any issues of inequity and ethical concerns. So another thing that I think is kind of interesting is that AI models were originally trained as caption writers. So they were getting all of these images, feeding tons and tons, billions of images into the AI models and saying, hey, caption this photo. So they might show, a Picasso and ask the Gen AI model to caption that painting, and then it would say a Pablo Picasso painting from this period. So they're giving them all of these images and telling them to caption it. And then they flipped that at some point and said, okay, here are these captions, i.e. prompts, will you make images from it? And so that's where we are now. What's fake can look real, right? Like some of you might be familiar with these images. This photo that came out of Kensington Palace from the royal family, it created this big hullabaloo because it turned out that some portions of it were not entirely human made and that it had been tweaked with AI. And that caused certain wire agencies to pull this image from their wire offerings, like Getty and AP, because when they found out that this photo had been tweaked with AI, it no longer kind of rose to the standard of truthful documentary and accurate visual depictions that they require to be part of their archive and to be part of their wire space. So this image was removed. And then on the right, we see this photo of Trump being arrested. And that was actually created by Elliot Higgins, who's the founder of Bellingcat. And he was kind of playing around with this image, put it on Twitter and said, this is an AI image. But then other people took that photo and posted it all over the web without that kind of acknowledgement. And so it created a lot of kind of buzz around it where people were saying, oh, this is an example of all the things that could go wrong because people believed that this was really happening. And what's real can look fake. Some of you might be familiar with this image that happened. It came from the Summer Olympics this year, Paris 2024 Olympic Games, where this photographer, Jerome Brulé, took this image that looks kind of shocking. Like, how did he get this photo? But it just was the way that everything happened. You know, if you've most of you, I think, on today are photographers, and you know how shocking things can kind of happen in camera, and it's just that all of these things come together, and it's really cool. You know, the wave came down and he just happened to still be in the air and he was doing this thing. And so it looks like, oh, this is a make believe, or photoshopped or AI photo, but it actually was real. And this is what happened in camera. The reason why I think that's important, and I'll return to this a little later, is that when so many of our audiences don't have that kind of basic visual media literacy, they're accustomed to thinking of things as being photoshopped or just not being real, being faked, right? So they see images like that and they just automatically denounce it as fake or just assume that it's not real. And so I think one of the big things we need to do is be more media literate, is communicate a lot more about how our images are made and how do we get photos like that. And I'll show you an example of that a little later. Now, is this photo AI generated? I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple images and how we can tell if it's AI generated. And then I'm going to have a little quiz and I'll ask you all to pop in the chat whether you think photos are AI generated or not. I will tell you this one is, right? Although, The Rock looking very serious and kind of badass is totally believable. But how do we know that images are AI visuals? So a couple tells is that AI has a really hard time um, accurately visualizing text and kind of little symbols like this. So you can see here, this is an example made by the New York Times. This quiz from AI is getting better fast. Can you tell what's real now? So thank you, New York Times. I'm borrowing your little quiz here. And we can see the way that the Rock's kind of security decals and badges don't really resolve into actual words, right? So even though this looks kind of realistic, his face looks real, and all these other elements look pretty real, photorealistic. He's a security guard in a mall. I don't know. I have trouble believing that The Rock would be a mall cop, but okay, sure. Um, what we're really looking at here is how AI fails to resolve those little images and text really accurately. And some of you might be familiar with the Pope Balenciaga debacle that happened a little while ago. And many people saw this image of the Pope in his really cute puffer coat and was like, I don't know, he's a progressive Pope. Maybe this could happen. But here are some ways that we can tell that that's not the case. So, uh, one of the things that AI also struggles with is just kind of clarity of form. So you'll often see that fingers or limbs, there's too many fingers, or they're starting to kind of meld into each other. Or if you see images where, maybe a person has an arm around another person and their hands coming down, it'll look like their arm and the other person's body are kind of melting into each other. AI is just bad at the little details, like resolving those things and really clarifying human forms and and shapes. You can also, I think this is a little bit easier maybe for photographers who are accustomed to looking at lighting and the direction of light sources and shadows and that kind of like quality of light and catch lights in the eyes. You can see those things in AI images that look a little weird or don't quite make sense where the catch light is coming from versus the direction of the light. Or you see this kind of distortion here. So see how the Pope's hands here are not quite resolved. See how the crucifix is like hanging a little weird and also isn't again quite clear. And then you can see how his eyelid here is like merging into his glasses. It actually looks like, um, a Picasso actually. So um, and then also, I think just kind of looking at images and thinking, is this really realistic? Have we ever seen the Pope in a puffer coat? Seems like he probably isn't at the height of fashion in this way. That's not typical to um, the popedom, right? So using our common sense and really interrogating, is this a rational representation of reality? Now, it's your turn. So I want to see in the chat, do you think this image is AI generated and why or why not? So just give me yeses or nos if anyone has a few thoughts on why you think it might be AI generated or not. All right, we've got a lot of no's, no's. Someone says yes, dino number 9 has an extra leg. A lot of folks think it's a real image. Some folks, yes, the legs. Okay, so thank you all for playing my little quiz. So this is a real image. It's from a T-Rex's race to the photo finish at the Washington State track taken by Lindsay Wasson, the Associated Press. And many of you are pointing out things that make sense, right? It's a little bit weird because we've got the 2 legs, but then we also have the T-Rex tail. So it looks a little confusing and it kind of seems to go in line with that, but it actually is a real image. Now, what about this one? Do you think this image is AI generated? Why or why not? You can drop that in the chat.
We're all scared to respond now.
Scared.
Oh God.
Don't be scared. Listen, no, there's no punishment for not getting it right. It's just a fun quiz. Now folks are like questioning their reality. I don't even know. This is
Who
a real
am I?
image. Right, right. All right, we got one AI. Okay, so I will tell you, this photo is also real. It's from the Churchill Downs, running of the Kentucky Derby, and it's a photo collaboration by Michael Clevenger and Eric Moen from the Louisville Courier Journal. Now, I think this is a great example because when we show this photo, people often are like, what? That's crazy. How could a person get a photo like that? It has to be AI. And this is a testament to kind of the ingenuity of visual journalists and also our kind of limited media literacy to the general public. This photo would be very dangerous for a photographer to get themselves, but they set up a camera ahead of time, put it right in the what's it called, like the front stretch, right? And so that enabled them to get this photo remotely and have this really incredible image that doesn't even look real because it's so cool. So humans can do really cool things that AI actually just can't do. AI would really struggle with the photo like this, honestly, because it would have all of these weird unresolved things. All right. Now, what about this one? Do you think this image is AI generated? Why or why not? And this is the last one. So I'd love to see your thoughts in the chat. IDK. We just don't know. Our sense of reality is just really being played with today, y'all. Yes, question mark. Okay. They're like confused. I feel like everyone was so like, yes, this is a real photo, like on the first part. And now everyone's like, I don't know, I'm afraid. Okay. Right. AI generated. All right. Well, some of you will be maybe less happy to know that happy, not happy, I'm not sure, but this is an AI generated image. And this is going to take us into talking about the thing that I think is really beneficial or potentially useful about AI. So this is a photo by Jake Verzosa, brilliant Filipino photographer who's doing this project called Stargazer. And he's reimagining what the Philippines during the disco era might have looked like. Excuse me. And I think this is really interesting because one of the ways that people use AI is to try and reimagine a time period that is lost to the archive or was not documented in many ways. And one of the things that, again, my colleague Devella said about this, she introduced me to these images. She said it represents a time period in the Philippines disco scene where women were taking control of their sexuality. And these images represent Filipinas within a reality that wasn't photographed. Personal archives of images like this from this time were destroyed by a volcano, and only the US military archives really remained or survived. So it kind of erased this other history. So what this photographer is doing is this really incredible thing where he's trying to bring back this visualization and representation of this time period that is meaningful for a lot of people. Similarly, this image on the right is a Philip Toledano image from his series We Are at War. And here he's imagining the missing Robert Capa images from World War II. I wonder how many of you would have looked at this photo of these soldiers and thought, that's real. It looks pretty real, but it is AI. Both of these images are AI. And I'm showing these photos here because I think they're doing this interesting and important work of representing things that we can't otherwise see, visualizing things missing from the historical archive, or trying to reimagine these erased experiences. Another example of that is this project here, Exhibit AI. And Exhibit AI, the refugee account, this Australian law firm worked with refugees who were kept in really terrible conditions and abused at Nauru Island, which is a detention, an offshore holding center for refugees and immigrants. And they shared their stories with this law agency, which were then turned into these AI images because there was no other visual documentation of those experiences that existed. So you can see here, this image is actually from this prompt of this refugee account on the left. I saw the emergency response team, ERT guards, approach the protesters and push them with plastic body shields. They appeared to be attempting to force the protesters off the hill and back into the camp. I observed that the ERT guards were rough with the protesters, and I saw them hit women and children as they forced them back into the camp. So, what Exhibit AI is doing is trying to visualize for us and get an emotional connection to the lived experiences of these refugees who are sharing their very, at times, harrowing stories. I tried to pick the one that would be a good representation of how the technology was used. And I encourage you all to go check it out. It's a really interesting project. At the end of this, I'm going to have a QR code that takes you to a resource page, and Exhibit AI is linked there, as well as many other articles and things I'm mentioning in this talk. But there's some really difficult images to look at and really difficult stories that people tell. And so I think this is an interesting thing to think about. How can we use AI in ways that actually push our knowledge forward rather than take things away from us? Now, with that said, there are plenty of challenges. And I think that there are three main issues. I would say that's equitable representation in AI imagery, the impacts to visual workers, and also just trust in authentic nonfiction visual content. So, thinking first about equitable representation, some of you might be familiar with what happened with Google Gemini, or maybe you've heard about how algorithms generally in Gen AI models are, shall we say, really showing their bias, the bias of the creators, right? So something that happened with Google Gemini is that when they came out with with Gemini, their AI model, they were trying to fix this issue of how Gen AI was reproducing implicit bias and explicit bias, how it was showing, like, representing Black and Brown people around the world, queer people, people from the global South, the majority world. And what Google Gemini did is create, as you can see down here is a screenshot of this. They created a Gen AI model that essentially wouldn't show white people at all. So people were like, hey, show an image of a pope. We have never had any popes that weren't white. And so they're like, here's an image of a pope. And of course, this is not representative of the reality of popes. They asked people asked Google Gemini to show images of Nazi soldiers and Vikings, and it returned images of Black and Brown people. So they created this kind of weird, warped world where rather than showing the authentic, wildly diverse world of Black and Brown people all over the world, in their kind of true authentic selves, they actually just produced a Gen AI model that limited the entire world to showing Black and Brown people, even in ways that weren't really realistic. So Google Gemini pulled that and they were like, whoops, sorry about it. And then they have put out a new version of that that has fixed that. But this is a good example of how really the people making Gen AI models don't know how to think about equitable representation. And that's in large part because it's predominantly made up of teams of mostly white males, Western people from Western nations, and people who are from very similar backgrounds. So whenever we have folks who are kind of thinking the same in a room, they don't come up with the most diverse or like accurate to reality kinds of technology. But I think that it's important also to know that photojournalism and news video, documentary film, they've always been framed predominantly through the lens of white male and Western perspective. So Gen AI is reproducing much of that same perspective, and they're being trained on data sets, the billions of images that are pulled from the internet that are already kind of showing that kind of perspective. So I think we have to keep intervening in those kinds of visual perspectives to get to a point where AI is being trained on images that are representing the reality of our very diverse, authentic world. And so that's, I think, one of the big challenges. Another thing is the impacts to visual workers. What is it going to do to illustrators, photographers, filmmakers when people can kind of just go and grab these things? And I think, grab Gen AI visuals. And I think that's the thing that is really scary to a lot of people. And I understand that. Um, I do think it's important to know that AI cannot replicate creativity. AI models do not know what it means to touch things, to smell things. They don't have those kinds of senses. So they're just reproducing a kind of facsimile of our lived experience of our reality. They just can't do what we can do. And so there's a limit, also, a limit really to how much AI can do. But I think when we have companies like Adobe saying things like skip the photo shoot, use our AI tool, like you see here, they're talking about using generative background. That's when it gets a little concerning because Adobe, of course, should be kind of backing up its photographers. We're the bread and butter, of their company. And Adobe's also, which I'll talk about in a minute, Adobe's also doing a big push alongside having Firefly, their own Gen AI model. They also are doing a big push with the Content Authenticity Initiative. So I think they're kind of in both spaces trying to capitalize on Gen AI and also trying to kind of help the industry deal with it. Now, a really important thing that I think all of us should be really familiar with is that you cannot copyright AI images, right? They're not made by humans, so they do not fall under copyright law. So at this point, anyone, if you make an AI image, people can kind of just take that photo and be like, this is mine. I don't have to ask you for it. I don't have to credit you. It's not made by you. It's made by Midjourney or Dolly or Firefly or Google Gemini. So it can't be copyrighted. Now, what does that ultimately mean for how visual workers, how we do our work? What are those implications for us? And also, because AI images do not have copyright, any image you create on Midjourney becomes kind of public domain. So I think it feeds back into the Midjourney engine and it can be remixed, upscaled, et cetera, by other paying users. So if you are using your own images to play around with an AI, because you can do a text prompt that will give you an image, or you can put your own photos into any Gen AI model and say, make me an image that looks like this, or turn this image into more of this, then you're giving your images to that model. What they pop out, even if it's very, very similar to your photo, it has now become part of public domain. So be really cognizant of that and think about what that might mean for your workflow. If you want to play around with AI, which I do encourage, if that's something you're interested in doing, just know, I don't give any of my images to AI. I don't want my images to be trained or to be training AI. So I might still work with AI to try and do different things, but I'm not going to share my images because I don't want to be in a position where someone is essentially got my photos and it looks exactly the same or very close to it. And now I don't have the copyright for that image. And also, in terms of thinking about creativity and what AI can't do, AI is actually getting worse. There's this idea of model collapse, where a phenomenon when AI models deteriorate over time because they're being fed AI generated data. And folks who are watching this space, who are kind of thinking about model collapse, are saying that roughly around 2026, we're going to see this real breakdown because there'll be so much AI and AI generated content online that there's just not enough actually creative, like quality human made content to feed those things, and it's all going to get really weird. So we know that we're doing something that AI, robots can't do. We have our creativity, they're not getting better, they're getting worse. And so I think, there's an opportunity here for us to understand this better and maybe not be as afraid of it. Um, and then the third issue is really the issue of trust, right? There's this long history of image manipulation and lack of trust in the public. So, what makes this moment more dangerous? I think we're getting into what I've heard called many times the liar's paradox. If one thing is false, everything is false. So, that is what I'm honestly the most concerned about is if our public can't trust what they see, how do they trust anything that we do? And if we're losing that ability to connect with our audiences and to make people feel like they can know that an image is real, we saw that in the chat. I was like, is this image real or not? And then folks are like, I don't know what to believe anymore. So we really want to avoid that, right? That sense of the liar's paradox. And I think that how we communicate to our audiences about our work, that is how we're going to build trust. We need to have more transparency, right? Visual media literacy is so limited. We as visual storytellers and editorial leaders have to make transparency part of our process. So here's a great example from the Seattle Times. Jennifer Buchanan took this photo, and I think she realized, this photo looks kind of fake because it's hard to understand how it would be taken. It looks like this guy is walking on water. So she showed this is the full frame. The man is standing on just a small spit of land. The wind's whipping up the waves. So, from her low perspective, you can basically eliminate the land. So, we can't see it there. And then we see the man's right foot slightly raised as if he's taking a step. The dog is jumping. So, we can't see its leg. But it was shot with the telephoto, kind of compressing the photo. Then we see a picture of her actually taking it from her perspective, the telephoto lens, its lower perspective. So, now, as a viewer, as an audience member, you can see, oh, wow, I understand how this image was taken. I can see the work being done. I can have respect for this photographer because that's really cool that they managed to get this instead of just that's a lie, right? Or that's not real. So that is what I would advocate for us all to do a lot more of. There's also a lot of efforts to address these issues that I've brought up here. There's a lot of examples of verification tools, more and more coming out. We have Meta has its own what it's called stable signature tool that is marking images as AI. There are some problems with that because it occasionally marks them incorrectly. Um, hmm, and you have to watch out for that because some folks have had their AI images flagged uh, as this is AI when it actually isn't. So there's some tweaks to work out there. And then we have, other ways you need to look at the meta, the EXIF data, and make sure that your images have that metadata in them. You can do photo forensics. There's a lot of different like tech tools that are trying to help us verify whether images are real or not. And then there's also tools to kind of trick AI, like Glaze or Fox, which does this thing called image cloaking. And that takes takes kind of tiny parts out of the image that essentially false flags it, or sorry, not false flags, that essentially makes it difficult for the AI model and other technologies to accurately identify. This is also a tool, image cloaking, that people have been using to kind of scramble surveillance technology and facial recognition technology. So there's some interesting things happening there. There's also data poisoning, where they're kind of uh, putting it's essentially kind of tricking the actual data sets that AI is being trained off of so that it can't read them effectively, or that it has this bad data that's making it come up with wrong information. And that's a little more complicated. I have an article about that in the resources because trying to go quickly, I don't have time to go through all the things. And what you see here, this is an example of the Four Corners project, which I'll say a little bit more about in a second. But this is a really great example of how Four Corners works, where it's kind of showing you it shows you authorship, backstory, related imagery, and links on each of the four corners. And then up here, you see this CR icon. That's the content credentials logo issued by Adobe that shows how all of these different elements of an image, if you did anything in Photoshop, if you color corrected in Lightroom, then that content credentials, you can click on it and it'll drop down all the different changes that were made to an image. And that helps people really understand, is this image real? Was it originally created out of camera? Was it created by AI? What has happened to it since then? Or was it created out of camera and then it was in some way tweaked by AI tools, which Adobe has many of? And I mentioned that Adobe is actually working to help in this space to help clarify and verify content provenance. So they're doing this initiative called the Content Authenticity Initiative, which is part of this global push, the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. And that is this kind of larger conglomeration of many, many different organizations and legal spaces that are trying to think about content provenance with open source verification tools, content credentials like the CR logo here, media literacy resources. They kind of think of themselves as a standards org, the kind of architect of the blueprint that is the open standard upon which CAI, the Content Authenticity Initiative, proceeds. And CAI is working to produce tech that actualizes those C2PA standards. So they have this content credentials that they're trying to put from capture to editing and publishing, telling us that the CR icon indicates the file has some underlying information. Santiago Leon is heading that up at Adobe, and he does this wonderful presentation. If you all ever have the opportunity to see it, how Adobe is thinking through these things and what they're trying to do in that space. And they use things like cloud-based fingerprinting, invisible watermarking, which is where you take a few pixels out of an image and replace them with other data. So AI models can recognize that, but it's invisible to the human eye. And invisible watermarking is being used in a lot of different ways. It actually helps identifying your images for copyright intrusions and all kinds of things. So I definitely recommend looking into it. And the CR credential also protects your images from data scraping. The CR label equals do not train AI models on this. It's also applicable to video. Now, the thing that I think the content credentials is great, what CAI is doing is really great. Leica camera has already put content credentials into their camera. Canon, Nikon, and Sony are working on CAI-enabled cameras that would have that content credential kind of already in the images that you produce from the camera. They're also working with smartphone cameras, but it's a little bit of a slower process, getting Apple and Google Pixel, et cetera, on board. Um, the thing that is a bit of an issue here is that it's quite expensive to integrate the content credentials into your website. So if you're, say you're a nonprofit newsroom and you want to be able for your audiences to come to the website and see, oh, all of these images have content credentials, I can see all this information. You actually have to build the infrastructure for that content credentials technology to work effectively and to show. And so that also is quite an expensive endeavor. And I think that's one of the limitations. Also, I've heard when Santiago Leon is speaking about this, he acknowledges that these efforts really depend on ubiquity, right? We hope that over time, the kind of absence of content credentials will become a flag that you need to take a closer look at that asset, he says. And he said this really wonderful thing, community is what's going to see us through, right? And so conversations like this, where we're educating each other about what we know and how we're using content credentials, that we're trying to see, like, how, I don't know about you all, but I can't just go pick up a new Leica camera just to get that content credentials in it. So those kinds of things are expensive. So we have to really be working with these organizations, raising flags about issues. Everyone can't just afford to do this big technological change. So how else do we integrate it into our workflow? So last I'll say about these different efforts is they're really thinking about the three pillars of a response to addressing the integration of AI in our lives. Provenance, like confirming where content comes from, and more so than proving what is fake, they're focused on proving what is real, which is a really big thing because we want to show people that the work we're making is authentic, that it is real, that people can trust us as visual storytellers. And I think doing that work of actually this thing we've never done in the history I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, we have all these ways of showing, how cool our photos are. And then people learn about photoshopping and now AI, and they get a little sketch about it. We need to actually do the work of telling people, how do we do this? What does it look like when it's real? What does it look like to be transparent with our audiences and communicate our work and our labor so that people are really excited about it and understand it. And then they start to know the difference between AI images and something created by a human. So getting that media literacy into schools from primary education to college, I think that's a really important part of fighting back against what's happening with AI. So provenance, education, and policy as this kind of trifecta. And if you aren't excited about technology, right, maybe you don't care about the content credentials and that's not what gets you going, but you are excited about media literacy and education, and that's a space to focus on. Are you all excited about policy? How do we get our policymakers and our governments and corporations to actually be really ethical and thoughtful about how they're producing these technologies and what they're doing with it? And finally, so I mentioned at the beginning that I would talk about that photo again. Now you can see here, this is the prompt that I use to get to this image. Here's the photorealistic image depicting the future of photojournalism. Or no, sorry, here we go. This is the original prompt where I asked them to make a very photorealistic documentary. Yes, I always say, please be nice to the robots. I'm hoping they'll be nice to me later. Um, Image depicting the future of photojournalism. And then I changed it down here where photojournalists are diverse across all identities as they do their visual work. Because when I just asked it to do a photorealistic documentary image of the future of journalism, photojournalism, this is what I got. And so you can also have this kind of back and forth. You can ask AI why it did what it did. And that's my favorite thing to do is, okay, that's an interesting choice. So can you tell me why all of the women in this image have long hair? Can you tell me why this photojournalist that you picked for the future of photojournalism is a white male? And you can see here that the AI has been trained to deny its bias, to say it's not intentional, it does not reflect any particular preference or bias. The image is generated based on a detailed description. So because I didn't ask it to be not a white man, it made it a white man. And then it says, well, if you'd like, I can create a diverse representation of this. And then this is the photo, the image that it gives me here, which is very interesting in how it now it shows a lot of people, um, people presenting as femme, masc, men, women, but also predominantly maybe Asian or white. There's not a lot of representation of a wide range of diversity. So even when I asked it to imagine a future of photojournalism that is diverse, it couldn't. It's also a little creepy how it's imagining photojournalism as, photojournalists wear goggles and have drones and really giant weird cameras that are broadcast cameras. So again, AI isn't all it's cracked up to be. It doesn't know how to really understand the world. It has a lot of limitations. I think this is a good example of what it doesn't get and how it doesn't always reflect our reality in ways that are, I think, really generative or accurate for us. So that is my overview. We're going to answer a lot of questions, hopefully. You all can you can grab this QR code and it'll lead you to a list of resources. I will also put the direct link to that document in the chat now. There you go. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions.
Listen, I mean, you take something that's so complex and still new and evolving, and you just simplified it. Like, I mean, my mind is blown because I was just like, I mean, it literally, like, this was such an intimidating, like, topic for me. Like, I never even dived into it because I just felt overwhelmed and intimidated by it. So, thank you for simplifying it in a way that makes sense and it's easy for us to just like grasp a little bit better, at least for myself. I mean, I see the chat also agrees, like, incredible. There's so many great questions coming into the Q&A box. Please feel free to continue dropping your questions. We'll try to tackle as many as we can. Just to kick it off, I guess I feel good that we still will have jobs, but I think that's like, okay, yeah, it's still not coming for our jobs yet, but um, I think I'll just go with, let me see which question to start with. So in some of our past classes, we've talked about the importance of sharing your work and promoting yourself and, utilize these social media platforms to do so. And now some of them have rolled out like in their, terms that we never read fully. Like LinkedIn,
Mhm.
for example, rolled something out about AI, it's like whatever you post is feeding the AI, and it's like, okay, you have to go manually uncheck that in your settings to opt out. So how do
Hmm.
you navigate promoting yourself, utilizing these social media platforms, but also protecting yourself, your work, and not just feed into, whatever AI systems?
Yeah. Well, I would say that this has actually been a problem, right? As you said, we often don't read those terms and conditions, and they've been doing rights grabs for a really long time. So basically, ever since they started these kinds of social media spaces, they're like, your images, they're mine. So read your terms and conditions, know what you're opting into, and opt out of it whenever you can. And then like the new iPhone, right? It has all these AI enabled settings that you have to go manually turn off. So I think we just actually have to become more knowledgeable about those things, even if it's scary or it's annoying. We need to know, like, what is our phone doing? What is social media doing? What am I agreeing to? And just like you read your contract, right? I hope all of you are reading your contracts if you're signing up for assignments and commissions. You should be reading those things thoroughly. That should just be part of your workflow. So go and read your terms and conditions and say no thank you to the stuff that you can. I've seen people do stuff like write in their caption, like, I do not give Meta access to this image. Unfortunately, that doesn't do anything, right? Once you post in those spaces, based on those terms and conditions, you're often agreeing to those things. So if you're really concerned about that, I would then go look at things like invisible watermarking, data poisoning, those kinds of tactics to if that is really like your concern, to try and stop AI from using your images in those ways. And also pay attention, right? Like we should have a say as consumers. So if Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, these big companies, Meta, Google, if they want to do this shady stuff where they're like, oh, I'm going to do a rights grab so we have access to train our AI models on all of your stuff, we need to be paying attention to what kinds of policies they're putting into effect. Like that's why policy is part of that trifecta, because that's how we'll get got, right? They're always trying to do stuff behind our back because they think we're not paying attention, and then they're just like, we're rolling it out. Here's an updated terms of service, sign it. We need to pay attention. We need to care about what is happening at the corporate and governmental policy level. And pushing back as a community is how we will have our voices heard. I don't know how comforting of an answer that is. It's like more work on our plate, but I feel it's
Yeah, when you
empowering, right, to pay attention to stuff and like speak out about it.
yeah, when you said something like something something and it's annoying. I was like, yeah, it's like annoying that, we have to like pay attention. But like you said, also very empowering, and 100% agree with Polly. And if you have a chance to look at the chat, everyone is like, thank you for putting this very kind of abstract, esoteric topic that I mean, didn't even want to know about because it's just scary to me, making it not scary and understandable. And then, of course, thinking about it from your perspective of, let's tackle the ethical concerns. So thank you for this brilliant presentation. We do have a lot of questions. So similar theme questions, AI is becoming the strongest arm of misinformation. How can we
Mhm.
prevent our images from feeding this? Is it legal for other people to put your images into AI? So that's one side of the spectrum. Like, is it even legal? How do we protect ourselves? I mean, you've mentioned many ways just now, like toggling things off, but maybe digging a little bit further into that. And then the positive ways that we can use AI, like what are your thoughts of using it as a starting point for text submissions when applying for grants? Can we, so there's a lot, but let's start with is it even legal?
That's a great question. Um, I am no legal, scholar expert. There are a lot of copyright laws pending right now because people are, understandably kind of freaking out. Like, how is it that you can use my images to train images and text, right? Because I don't know if you all are familiar with this, but like the New York Times had this huge settlement with, I think, Google or OpenAI, one of the Gen AI model creators, because they had been training their models on New York Times content. And New York Times was like, hold on, you're going to pay us for that. And they got this like $1 million contract, right, to like back pay them essentially. So I think that has opened up the floodgates for copyright laws where people are saying you can't just train your models on all of our content and then replicate that content and put us out of jobs without actually paying us for that originality. So that stuff is going through the courts right now, and we're seeing a lot of movement. I feel like there's been less movement with image-based issues. And maybe that's just because ChatGPT came out a lot earlier, right? So people were thinking about specifically text and how text was being used before their now Gen AI models that are generating images and videos are a lot more prominent and coming out and getting better like every day. So I think we're going to see a lot more copyright lawsuits around images. As of right now, it is not illegal for someone to use your images to model AI on. I think that if we I have some like inside information about a thing that happened with the company that I'm like not supposed to talk about. But I always want to be like, this is how you deal with that. Like, basically, if you can prove that your images were trained on without your permission, you have a good case to say like you owe me money, and we could make a case about that, right? So again, this is like a community oriented thing. If you feel like you've seen images that are pulling from your photographs, then get together, get a lawyer, right? Let's do a class action lawsuit. Those are the kinds of things that honestly we're going to have to do, because OpenAI, Google, they're not going to come up to you and be like, yo, we totally trained this model on your image and we want to give you some money for it. Like, that's not going to happen. So, unless they get this class action lawsuit and then they have to go back and give money to everyone that they realize their images were trained on. But I mentioned that data set that Midjourney and Stable Diffusion were trained on was 2.5 billion images, right? So how many people's photographs, and also just, it's not even like professional photographers, it's just whatever's on the internet. It's like your mom's birthday party on Facebook. It's like, you know, your I have a 14-year-old daughter, my 18-year-old son. They're out here posting all kinds of stuff on Snapchat. Like, I don't really have a way to know how those Snapchat might have some kind of agreement with OpenAI that the images that my 14-year-old puts on there they can use. And that's why we've got to read the terms of service, and we've got to be like really paying attention and demanding that these kinds of things happen. So right now it's really murky about what is legal and what is not legal, because the law is always years behind technology, right? The law is still trying to figure out social media, whether Instagram can embed your photos without paying you. That lawsuit is still going through the courts. So they haven't even caught up to like what is Instagram doing with AI in your photos, so we've got to be on it.
So I'm gonna get rid of all of my cell phones, all of my computers, and just go live out in the woods and just
I think
say,
you want to do that anyway, so I'm
and
just
just
gonna let you do
and
that.
just wait for the collapse in 2026, but also being kind and generous and appreciative and thankful to AI, because I also don't want anyone robotic to come after me.
It's like, we love
Tara's
you,
like, this
AI.
was
Blink,
not the
blink.
takeaway, Danielle. This was not the takeaway.
No, we've got to harness this. We've got to be on top of it. We're not letting AI take our jobs or anything
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. Tara for president. I'll just tell me what to do. I'll do it.
Well,
Okay, so blah blah. Go ahead, go
oh,
ahead.
I was gonna say that I saw this question that I wanted to talk about
Yes.
in the chat. Oh wait, where did it go? It was a question about like using AI to write grants.
Oh
I
yeah,
don't see it.
yeah. Yeah, we
Okay.
got it. So it says, what are your thoughts of using AI as a starting point for text submission when applying for grants? Also, what do you think of generating AI images for projects where we can't create our vision for some reason? And then I'm just going to tack on one more where someone asks, what are some ways that one can share your images with AI? For example, would that mean like asking AI to analyze my website for suggestions? Is that sharing my images with AI, or how would that work? So did you get all that?
Yes. Well, maybe I'll need you to rewind it back.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
two big things that I didn't mention that I meant to mention in my talk. One, a big problem with AI that is not currently being effectively solved is that it has an extreme climate impact. Every generated image So like, those two visuals that I showed at the end that I generated, every image you generate using an AI model takes roughly the amount of energy as charging your smartphone entirely, which is bad. It's bad. It doesn't, it's kind of hard to like understand what that means. But essentially, Gen AI, specifically image generation, uses so much energy. So I really try to, people will say like play in the space. I try not to play. Like I'm like, what am I going to do? What do I need specifically? How am I going to use this? And then I'll do a lot of talking to the AI model, like you kind of saw in that chat where I'm asking it, why did you do this? What I want you to think about this thing. I try not to have it generate a bunch of images because I'm trying to be thoughtful of that climate impact. Basically, any amount of generating images is not great for the environment. So keep that in mind when you're doing this work. With that said, I think you do need to work with it, right? Like if it's something you're interested in doing, I'm not saying don't do it. Um, but be cognizant of that, right? We want to be aware of how we're using energy and what our footprint is. Now, luckily, the text, using ChatGPT and kind of like prompting it to spit out text doesn't use as much energy as image generation. It's still a climate impact, environmental impact, but I actually use ChatGPT quite a bit to help with sort of random things, but especially iteration, right? Like I'm trying to write a grant project. I actually did this for a big grant I was writing for a photo grant. And I said, here's the like thing, here's my little like abstract, my idea. Can you please formulate a grant proposal? And then it gives me all these sections, all the stuff. Now, I would never submit a grant proposal as written by AI. It's a terrible idea because again, AI is bad at stuff, right? So if you read like my son I mentioned just started college, and ironically yesterday when I was like tweaking my AI presentation, he was like, "Mom, can you help me edit this essay?" And I look at the essay and I was like, "Boy, AI wrote this for you. Don't you dare. I'm a professor. You're not turning this in." And he was like, "No." And I was like, "Stop. I'm not even go back and rewrite it." Like the thing is you can tell like it AI repeats words a lot. It's over wordy, like it's trying to write in this really high level tone that it just can't achieve, and it's very unspecific. So in your grant proposal, you want to be very specific, very concise, right? Very demure. And we really need to like you can use AI models to help get you going, right? And then you to iterate and like start that kind of creative flow, like, oh yeah, these are the sections I need. Oh, I do want to start by saying this thing. And then you rewrite it, right? Like it's just like an outline essentially. I think that's really effective. It's a very helpful tool. I've talked to colleagues who have ADHD or, other struggle with areas of various neurodivergence, and AI has helped them align their creative output with kind of like framing it in a way that is accessible. So it can be really used for a lot of great things and it can support your workflow. As the scholar, I really hate organizing my bibliographies and things like formatting it. So I'll just drop my kind of messed up bibliography in a chat GPT and be like, please make this MLA style. And it's like, here you go. So that's awesome. Like that's stuff that it's really good at, right? I'm not asking it to be creative. It's just checking what is MLA. And then I'm just going to format this exactly. And those kinds of tasks, it does really, really well. Because again, it's like text, it's really basic. Okay, there were many other questions in that question. So we got the grant question. What are the other ones?
I think you kind of answered it. The other one was about like using images on the website to get
Mm.
feedback, but you said like be mindful of how often you're using images, and you can use AI. So I think you answered it. I think that was pretty clear. Polly, we've got probably 5 more minutes for questions, even though the questions are like flowing like crazy right now. Polly, do you want to pick? We've got like more questions than we can probably answer.
Yeah, I'll ask this one here. As we some of us, me, failed your pop quiz. You shared your resources that we dropped in the chat, so thank you for that link there. But do you have any other recommendations for improving visual literacy that we can teach ourselves better how to spot these, fake and not fake images?
Yeah. So I don't remember if I said this, but AI models are improving so quickly that like honestly, the things that I was saying a year from now, they probably will have fixed that because they're the people who are creating these things, right? The tech folks and the companies, their aim is to make the images really effective and realistic. So when they see that everyone's like, "Oh, you messed up the fingers and the limbs," they're fixing those things. So right now, that's true that you can kind of tell that stuff. I don't know if that'll be the tell 6 months from now, 9 months from now. So just want to throw that out there. Um, Check out Adobe's media literacy material that's in the resource list. And also, that resource list that I sent will get updated. Javelle and I will be adding to it. And the very first resource at the top is a bibliography by a professor at the University of Minnesota, Regina McCombs. And she's compiled this wildly amazing overview of just everything people are thinking about with photography and AI. So I start with that because it's like a much bigger resource than the one that I'm giving you. Take a look at that. It has a, if this is something that you're interested and excited about or really terrified about, whatever you're feeling, I really encourage you to delve into reading about it. I don't know if this is true for y'all, but like knowing something helps me feel less afraid of it. And so that's kind of why I was like, what is this AI thing? I've got to know. And I was just like heading down reading all this research about it. So really encourage you to check out those resources there. Building media literacy for yourself and then sharing that whenever you can, right? Talking about stuff on, if you have a big Instagram following or a big TikTok following, then talk to your followers. Be like, look at this image this person made. We're going to break it down. Look at this photo that I made. We're going to break it down. Look at, I decided to use Gen AI and now I'm doing a screen capture. You can see what I'm making and what I'm thinking about. And one thing that I tried to do is I was thinking about doing a project of my own images where I tried to make AI get as close to my own images as possible. And I meant to actually show a couple of those. It just couldn't do it. Like it just, I have this like one portrait of a woman in front of this green wall bougainvillea, and I was like, this is easy. It really couldn't do it. It had a lot of limitations. It's like a whole other talk. But I encourage you to do things like that. If you have that kind of following, expand media literacy in your community and amongst your followers, because this is what we have to do, right? It's like people aren't necessarily searching out this information. They're not necessarily going to read all of these pages of documents and policy and scholarship. That's my jam. I don't really mess with TikTok, but folks who are doing that kind of social media education and space of sharing with folks, like make them media literate there. Um, there's another
No, no,
question.
that was spot on. I think my last question to you, because we are short on time here. When you're thinking about just like your own photo archive and what that will look like, far, even like myself, it's like when we're far gone from this earth. And has I think there's been some conversations about like actors and musicians, and now they have it in their contracts and their wills about, don't use AI or my likeness, my voice,
Mhm.
etc. After. Should photographers, as storytellers, should we be thinking about it in the same sense? Like, how do we protect our work beyond after we're gone, or is it too early to even start thinking about that?
Oh, it's never too early. We need to think about our legacy and our retirement. This is really important because like even before AI entered the scene, work for hire contracts are screwing over photographers' retirement. We need to have access to our own copyright. We need to retain our copyright. We need to be able to sell our images. That archive is our retirement. If you're a full-time freelance photographer or filmmaker and you're not retaining your copyright, then you're not going to have the royalties to live off of when you no longer want to be a photographer. We can't be out here being photographers till we're 95. Okay. Like nobody wants that. So, I mean, maybe you do. I do not want that. So, and I don't want that for my friends, my colleagues. I want us to be able to sit down, have some iced tea on the front porch, relax. Think about the older days when we used to photograph and it was cute and now we're chilling. So, in order to do that, we actually really need to be very conscientious about retaining our copyright, putting your metadata, put your copyright, your name, everything, your website, put it into your images, every single one, right? And don't let a single image escape your your personal hard drive into the internet with it without it having that information. Now, people can screenshot your stuff, right, and it doesn't retain that. Because of AI, we're actually moving in a better direction, weirdly, where more effort is being put into thinking about how we do things like invisible watermarking and content credentials. So we're actually moving towards better access to retaining metadata in images, even if they get screenshot or whatever. Look into that, right? If you want to retain your ownership of your images and make sure that wherever it goes in the world digitally, that people know it's yours, look at Adobe's content credentials, content authenticity initiative, look at invisible watermarking. That might just be a thing that it is an expense, right? It's an additional expense, but I think we need to integrate it into our visual workflow and make it a part of how we do this work, because retaining our ownership and our like control over who uses our images is integral to making that money, right? And getting that bag. And I want that for everybody. We need to all succeed. We need to all have people see our images, know it's ours, respect it, pay us for it. This is our labor. So, AI or not, we need to do that. AI weirdly is pushing companies to help us do that better.
Wow.
Brilliant. Thank you. I mean, you gave us so much to look into, some homework. My mind has been just like, oh my goodness. But like you said earlier, like you took something that was so scary or overwhelming and intimidating, I should say, for myself. And you really just simplified it. And so thank you for your incredible presentation. I see a lot of great thank yous in the chat as well. This was just so insightful and helpful. I mean, yeah, really illuminate exactly. Thank you
And
so
thank
much.
you all so much. It was lovely to see you, Polly and Danielle. I miss your faces. Thank you
Always a
so much
pleasure.
to everyone for having us, and thank you for being here. I really appreciate y'all. And please feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to drop my email in the chat.
Please.
I saw a few other questions that I have answers to, and then some questions that I'm not sure, but now I'm thinking about them, and so I'm going to do some research. So thank you all for being here and for your insights and your questions. I appreciate you all, and I hope to see you in the world. Take care,
Yes.
Thank you so
y'all.
much, Tara,
Lauren,
and
thank you
thank
for
you to
leading
your
the
partner. Also,
Yes,
I'm
Javel,
sorry.
Polly.
I was going to
Yes,
just shout out
Joelle.
Jovel. Both joined us. So thank you, Jovel, for your work in this as well.
Love you,
Have a
Joelle.
good day, y'all. I'll see you in the other essentials webinars.
Wow. I
Wow.
mean, just
And she
like,
left us, yeah. You know the meme that's like the equations flying around in the background? That was me at the
yeah,
beginning, but now I feel
oh,
empowered. I feel like,
absolutely.
hey,
No, I mean it's true, like what she said though. It's like even when approaching things like, for example, contracts and licensing, it was the same type of concept, right? Like when you get a contract and all these terms like work for hire that you do not understand also feels overwhelming, intimidating, and scary, but you just have to learn and grasp it. And the more you know, the more you can actually feel empowered and do this and protect yourself. And so I really, really appreciate her insights and Javel's work in this presentation. This was
yes.
incredible. I mean, maybe we might need to do a part two because this
I
time of
know.
year, who knows where AI will be? So this time next year, we might have a part two on this. That was
Yeah.
incredible. And thank you all for your amazing questions. We are now at the point where we're going to take a little 30-minute break. So if you were with us with these back-to-back sessions, now is your time to stretch, recharge, get some water, get some food, whatever you need to do, and be back here in 30 minutes for our next two incredible speakers. You do not want to miss them. I'm telling you, the next class. Ooh, Miss Denise Kinnan, I'm telling you, she's as Intinusa mentioned about like all these unofficial mentors she has. Like Denise is one of my unofficial mentors. So Denise, if you're listening, you're one of my unofficial mentors. So don't go away. You can
Aw.
leave your
She
Zoom
dropped a heart.
here, like you can leave your Zoom on, just pop back in 30 minutes. That's 1 p.m. Eastern time. So just 30 minutes from now, pop back in. We'll be back with more incredible classes all made free thanks to our incredible partner, Photo Wings, a nonprofit whose goal to help photography be better understood, created, utilized, seen, and saved.
Yes. Thanks, everyone. See you soon after a short break. We'll be back after this short break. I did it.